Hey, what up? This is Mr. View, and this is World History, and we're continuing on with World War One. You guys did a little bit of research on some battles. You did some research on some weapons, and we've talked about a lot of the stuff that's going on so far. But the two sides have gotten even a little bit bigger, right? The Central Powers, Austria-Hungary and Germany to begin with, have added Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire. So they're becoming bigger and stronger, and so are the Allies. The Allies started off in Bosnia, their big brother Russia, and their ally France. When Germany marched through Belgium, that brought them in, and their ally England. Italy and Japan also jumped on board with the Allied side. So now you really do have a world war. Japan, right at the start of this, they start to fight against China, which was one of Germany's allies. So they attack China, and that's going to be a recurring theme here for the next few years, 50 years or so, when they keep going after China in World War II, especially. That's one of the touchy points of World War II, and that drags us in. But not only these countries are fighting, but remember we've talked about imperialism and how a lot of these countries had little colonies throughout the world, especially in like Africa, right? And so these colonies fought alongside their mother countries, and the colonies thought, hey, if I fight really hard for France, they will free us after this war. If I fight really hard for Germany, they're going to free us after the war. They're going to give us our independence. But that's not really the case. That's not what happens. Yeah, they fight hard for those mother countries, but they don't gain their independence after World War One. So it's a facade. Big word. So now we got Central Powers and allies, and all their colonies joined in. So this makes it a true world war, right? These countries are practicing total war, and total war means when you use all of your resources in the war effort. So, for instance, you're no longer making refrigerators, you're starting to build tanks in your factory. You're no longer creating, I don't know, nylon stockings, you're creating nylon parachute stuff. So, all of this stuff went toward the war effort. You're not making maybe cars, you're making war vehicles. So, total war meant everything was going into the war effort. And you got to think about it this way. All right, a lot of these countries are in Europe, and they're right side by side. If they lose this war, they might be speaking a different language. They might have a different style of government. So it's all in. I mean, think about it. If China attacked us and we lost, no longer are we democratic. We are going to be communist. No longer are we, worried about English as the first language. It's going to be moving towards Chinese. Or since there's not a lot of religion in communist countries, we might lose that Christianity backbone of our country. So everything was going into the war effort. It's all or nothing. It's win or go home, or lose your home, right? So total war, using all of a country's resources for the war effort. How did they do this? Number one, they used the draft. It's called conscription. That's a really big, long word, but it just means a draft. Conscription is the draft. And that meant the men, young men, 18 and above, had to say, hey, I'm eligible for the war and to be a soldier. And this was a big, contentious point, if you will, because not everybody wanted to fight, right? Not everybody wants to go fight and possibly die for their country. Conscription was one way to make sure you had plenty of soldiers. If you didn't go after you were drafted, a lot of times you were thrown in jail. So, not a good choice there. Conscription was one way. Forced labor was another. You had to work. You had to be working towards a war effort. Number three, they raised taxes. They needed money to build these war machines. They needed money for guns. They needed money to feed the soldiers who now are in a different country, perhaps, or to clothe them, or for whatever reason, they needed that money. So they had to raise the taxes on the normal people. Rationing. You couldn't necessarily go to a gas station and get 10 gallons of gas or fill up your tank or use all the butter or use all of whatever. They gave you X amount per month or per the year that you could use, and that was it. You didn't get any extras, for instance. So a lot of that stuff was being used for the war effort. They needed gas to run the tanks or the planes or whatever, the boats to get people over there. So they had to ration that stuff. And then propaganda. Propaganda was everywhere. And we know what propaganda is, right? It's something that you say to promote or hurt a cause. So I might say, Mr. View, he really takes care of the youth. He is a very great guy, or whatever, right? Or I might say something negative about somebody else to hurt the cause. If I want you to really dislike the other side, or Mr. Withers, I might say, yeah, he kicks dogs, right? And I might promote that to where he's doing bad things, I'm doing great stuff, and you really like me and you really dislike him. And so in our country, we use propaganda all the time. You saw it in this election, right? You had two very different sides. You had the Democrats over here, the Republicans over here. And if you believe one side, you believe that the virus is going to kill everybody every minute. And if the other side, you might have believed, it's not that big a deal, right? Or you might believe that Trump was this terrible guy, or Trump was this great guy saving the country. So the propaganda was on both sides and different media outlets that really try to promote their cause, help their side, and hurt the other side. And so they would do stuff like this within their media. On the radio or whatever, you hear strong anti-German rhetoric within these allied countries. That they said that these German people were terrible people, and that these soldiers were doing horrible things, and we've got to fight back. We've got to do something. So propaganda or censorship was used throughout the war, and it's a very strong, powerful tool. There's a reason that we have freedom of press. If we are not allowed to say good or bad things about something, and we can only say one thing, that's bad, right? That's too much power. So we've got to be very careful with the censorship and the use of propaganda, and make sure it's truthful and factual. But it was used throughout the war effort to really gain patriotism and try to hurt the other side. Women were awesome during this World War. They not only worked in the factories, because let's face it, the guys were off fighting. They're carrying guns and shooting at each other. The women are the ones that were producing all of the goods. They were in the factories grinding it out. They were working really hard all the time. They also served in some of the armed forces as nurses and things, and they were still responsible for raising the children. So they were doing everything in society while guys were out fighting. So if there was school going on, they were running the schools, they were running the hospitals, they were running the businesses, they were running the factories. They were doing all of those things that men typically had done in society up until that point. And this changes the world, because after the war, they realized, hey, we can do all of this stuff. And they wanted to continue to do that stuff and to gain more. And so this was a very big turning point for women throughout the world. If you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to email me and let me know what your questions are or problems are. Today is going to be an easy assignment. I want you to write 50 to 100 words about propaganda or censorship. Should propaganda or censorship have a role in today's America? Or what role does propaganda play in America right now? So I want you to use some concrete, strong examples and really talk about maybe how propaganda is shaping America, and maybe even the youth of America.